At just 28 years old, Farley Granger signed a contract with Hollywood that carried a cruel condition. He was forbidden from living with his boyfriend. Imagine being at the height of youth, beauty, and stardom, yet forced into secrecy by ink on a page. For Granger, who had just risen from struggling beginnings to national fame, it was a chilling reminder that his real self had no place in the spotlight. He smiled for cameras, kissed actresses on screen, and played the dreamboat America adored. But the truth was buried behind studio clauses and whispered warnings. This was the cost of being young, talented, and in love during Hollywood's golden age. But how did a Brooklyn boy, born into hardship, find himself trapped in such a gilded cage? To understand that, we must return to where his story began. Farley Earl Granger Jr. was born on the 1st of July 1925 in San Jose, California, but his earliest years were marked by turbulence. His father, a working-class man, tried and failed at running an automobile business during the Great Depression, forcing the family into a sudden and humiliating fall from comfort to near poverty. His mother, a determined and ambitious woman, shielded him as best she could from the shame of repossessions and unpaid bills. Yet Farley would later admit that this sense of instability shaped his hunger for approval, for applause, for a world larger than the confines of his childhood. The backdrop of his youth was an America reeling from financial collapse, where bread lines stretched down city blocks and families clung to the radio for both news and hope. Jazz spilled from phonographs, while Hollywood's dazzling musicals offered a glittering escape from hardship. Men wore wide-brimmed hats and double-breasted suits. Women favored sleek bias-cut dresses, and a culture of glamour floated above the reality of struggle. As a boy, Farley was drawn to that glittering world. He would sit in darkened theaters, mesmerized by stars like Clark Gable and Myrna Loy, their luminous images flickering across the screen. His parents' troubled marriage and constant money worries only deepened his craving for that sense of beauty, order, and excitement. Acting became not only a dream but a way out, a path to escape the instability of his family's life. When World War II arrived, Granger was still a teenager. He joined the ranks of countless young Americans whose lives were disrupted overnight. Though not destined for long service, the experience exposed him to loss, comradeship, and the fleeting nature of life. In that crucible, his passion for performing grew sharper. He saw in the theater and the movies a chance to preserve something fleeting, to give permanence to moments that otherwise vanished. By the early 1940s, Hollywood was expanding rapidly, hungry for new talent to feed audiences, desperate for escape from war. Studios scoured schools, stage companies, and even street corners to discover fresh faces. Farley, a handsome, striking young man with a sensitive gaze and a natural grace, soon caught the attention of scouts. For a boy who had grown up in Depression-era uncertainty, it was intoxicating to imagine stepping into that dream machine. His heart was set. The road to Hollywood was opening before him, and he was ready to follow it. When Farley Granger arrived in Hollywood, he was barely out of his teens. His youthful looks and quiet intensity immediately caught the eye of Samuel Goldwyn, one of the most powerful studio heads of the era. Goldwyn was notorious for molding raw talent into stars, and he saw in Granger a perfect blend of innocence and allure. Farley signed with the studio, stepping into a world where contracts controlled every choice, from the roles he played to the way he dressed in public. His early assignments were small but promising. Then came his breakthrough. In 1948, Alfred Hitchcock cast him in Rope, opposite John Dahl and James Stewart. Based loosely on a true crime, the film shocked audiences with its experimental style and its unspoken homoerotic undertones. Farley played one of the killers, an unnerving role for a young actor just finding his footing. Though critics were divided on the film, they agreed that Granger had a screen presence impossible to ignore. Just 2 years later, Hitchcock returned to him for Strangers on a Train. Released in 1951, the picture became a classic. As tennis star Guy Haines, unwillingly entangled in a stranger's murder scheme, Granger displayed both charm and a simmering vulnerability. Audiences across America recognized his face, and fan magazines began publishing glossy spreads of the tall, dark-haired actor with the soulful eyes. But behind the glowing profiles was a constant pressure. The studio machine demanded not just performances, but a carefully manufactured persona. Fan clubs wanted him paired with glamorous actresses, his name linked in gossip columns to ingenues and starlets. In reality, Farley often felt like he was playing two roles, one for the camera and one for the public. As the 1,950 seconds advanced, his career blossomed. He starred in They Live by Night, a poetic noir that showcased his sensitivity, and appeared alongside giants like Kathy O'Donnell, Shelley Winters, and Ruth Roman. Directors praised his naturalism, noting that he brought a quiet honesty to even the most melodramatic scripts. By his mid-20s, Farley Granger was not just another studio contract player. He was a rising star, poised for long-lasting fame. Yet, as the lights of success blazed brighter, so too did the shadows behind them. The very system that made him famous demanded silence about his private life. To be a star in 1,950 seconds, Hollywood meant living under contracts that dictated not just your work, but your heart. For Granger, the pressure to hide who he loved was about to grow unbearable. Farley Granger's star image was clean, romantic, and resolutely heterosexual. But in reality, his most profound connections were with men, and each relationship had to be carefully hidden from the public eye. Behind the walls of studio parties, in discreet apartments, and during stolen trips abroad, he lived a second life, one that could never be photographed for fan magazines. One of his earliest loves was playwright Arthur Laurents, whom he met at a party in the late 1,940 seconds. Laurents, already on his way to becoming a celebrated writer for Broadway and Hollywood, was sharp, witty, and openly gay among trusted friends. Their connection was immediate. They strolled New York streets after theater performances, whispered to each other in dimly lit bars, and shared a language of coded glances at industry gatherings. Farley would later describe Laurents as both a lover and a guide, someone who helped him navigate the treacherous balance between authenticity and survival. But secrecy was the rule. Studio contracts carried morality clauses that forbade behavior deemed immoral. Some went as far as forbidding actors from cohabiting with same-sex partners. At only 28, Granger signed one such contract, explicitly banning him from living with his boyfriend. It was a chilling reminder that even within his own home, love had to be hidden. He also grew close to Leonard Bernstein, the brilliant composer and conductor. Their time together was passionate but unpredictable, as Bernstein balanced his music, his fame, and his own conflicts about identity. Farley moved in artistic circles where same-sex relationships were both an open secret and a constant risk. The FBI kept files on suspected homosexuals. Tabloids like Confidential hunted for stories that could ruin careers. Even whispers could bring down a star. There were happier chapters too. Farley cherished travel to Europe, where the atmosphere was freer. In Italy, filming neo-realist projects, he found space to breathe, to walk hand in hand without fear of recognition. He mingled with actors, painters, and directors who lived with more openness than Hollywood would allow. In those moments, he tasted the life he longed for, a life without disguises. Still, every tender evening carried the weight of danger. Friends were trusted cautiously, coded language was essential, and even a photograph taken in the wrong company could spark gossip. The pressure was constant, exhausting, and deeply unfair. And yet, he continued to love, refusing to let contracts and clauses extinguish his need for intimacy. But as the 1,950 seconds darkened with fear and suspicion, the walls around him began to close in. By the mid-1,950 seconds, Farley Granger felt the tightening grip of Hollywood's fear. The Hays Code ruled the screen, dictating what stories could be told and what lives could be acknowledged. At the same time, McCarthyism fueled suspicion, and whispers of homosexuality were enough to end a career. For Farley, rumors swirled. He had been seen in the company of men not linked to the studio's official publicity romances. Confidential magazine, infamous for destroying reputations, began sniffing around. Executives called him into meetings, reminding him of the contract clauses he had signed. He was ordered to attend premieres with women, to smile for the cameras, and to make sure no photograph suggested anything else. The strain was immense. Work offers began to shift. He was no longer the fresh young star the studios promoted with confidence. Instead, he was steered toward darker, smaller projects, or loaned out for roles the studio had little faith in. By 1953, weary of the restrictions, he bought out his contract from Goldwyn, a rare and risky move that left him free, but also vulnerable. The personal toll was heavy. Relationships grew strained under the constant need for secrecy. Arthur Laurents, though supportive, pressed him to live more openly. But Farley feared the cost. Each attempt at freedom was shadowed by anxiety. What if a friend betrayed him? What if a rival spoke to the press? The thought of exposure haunted him. In the wider culture, the pressure was suffocating. Police raids on gay bars made headlines. Studios circulated memos about morality. Young actors were warned that even a rumor could blacklist them. For Farley, every choice carried danger. To love meant to risk everything. To deny meant to live half a life. The crisis left him isolated. Though he still worked appearing on stage and screen, he felt Hollywood's confidence in him slipping. What had once been a smooth ascent now looked uncertain, fractured by fear and silence. For a man who had risen so quickly, the fall into obscurity felt brutal. His life was at a low ebb, defined by contracts, suspicion, and a gnawing loneliness. But Farley was not finished. In the years to come, he would step away from the Hollywood machine, reclaim his craft on his own terms, and build a new life beyond the studio's control. Leaving the suffocating grip of the studios, Farley Granger sought reinvention. He turned to the stage, where the scrutiny was less intense and the work more rewarding. On Broadway, he tackled challenging roles, proving that he was not just a pretty face shaped by Goldwyn's factory. Critics praised his sincerity, his willingness to dig into flawed, vulnerable characters. For the first time in years, he felt like an artist again. Television also welcomed him. Guest appearances on dramas and anthology series gave him a steady career outside the glare of the Hollywood spotlight. He no longer had to rely on publicity dates or fabricated romances. He could simply work. And in New York, far from the studio's gossip, he found a community where he could live with greater honesty. In his personal life, Farley embraced companionship more openly. After his years with Arthur Laurents ended, he built a long and steady partnership with Robert Calhoun, a stage manager whose stability balanced Farley's restless energy. Together, they created a life built not on secrecy, but on trust. In later interviews, Farley spoke of Robert with warmth, describing their bond as one of the true anchors of his existence. As society slowly shifted in the 1,960 seconds and 1,970 seconds, Granger watched younger generations push back against the silence that had nearly destroyed him. The Stonewall Uprising, the rise of LGBTQ visibility, and the gradual crumbling of the old codes gave him perspective. He had endured Hollywood's most oppressive years, and though it had cost him leading roles, it had not broken him. In 2007, he published his memoir, Include Me Out. In it, he was candid about his sexuality, his relationships, and the compromises demanded by his era. Readers were struck by his honesty. At last, the boy from Depression-era California, once bound by contracts forbidding him from living with his boyfriend, could tell his truth without fear. In his final years, Farley Granger lived quietly in New York with Calhoun until Robert's passing in 2008. Farley himself died in 2011, at the age of 85. By then, he was remembered not only for Hitchcock's classics, but for his resilience, his honesty, and his survival through one of Hollywood's most repressive chapters. He often said he never regretted leaving the studio system. Freedom, even at the cost of stardom, mattered more. That choice gave him the chance to live on his own terms, with integrity, with love, and with dignity. Farley Granger's story is one of survival in an era built on silence. He was a boy of the Depression who rose to the heights of Hollywood fame, only to discover that success came with invisible chains. At 28, he signed contracts forbidding him from living with the man he loved. He smiled for the cameras, played the romantic hero on screen, and lived under constant threat of exposure. Yet behind the curtain, he continued to love, to create, and to endure. His life reminds us of the cost paid by stars forced to live in hiding. He lost roles, he lost freedom, and he carried loneliness that no award could erase. But he also found resilience, carving out a career on stage, writing his own memoir, and building a home with Robert Calhoun. He proved that even when a system denies your truth, you can still write your own ending. Today, his films still flicker with intensity, and his candor continues to inspire. Farley Granger lived through fear, but he left behind honesty, and perhaps that is his greatest legacy: the courage to tell the story that once had to be hidden. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. Which of Farley's films stays with you the most? And if you want more hidden Hollywood stories, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's next.